Hello and welcome to the Constant State Podcast. I am Tyler the Tiger, and here with me is Iron Mike. And we are going to kick off this podcast by learning how to learn. I think we're going to go down a little bit of a journey for understanding, why it's important to be in that continued state of learning and what we can do to get into that continued state of learning and a constant state of learning.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those topics, right, that we come across all the time with, especially in our industry, where the learning never stops, and that curiosity is what kind of keeps you going. You always have to be curious about what's out there, why you should try something, what there is to learn, stay on the trends. There's a lot of those things, and it's kind of helpful to understand that constant state of learning kind of keeps you motivated, right? Like, it's easy to get stale, burnt out, but if you're in that constant curiosity learning cycle, like, I feel like that kind of keeps you fresh and moving forward to a better place, really, all the time.
Yeah, I know it's tough for me to feel like sometimes I get into a stale state where I feel like my skills are good enough, but the industry is always changing. And that industry is, we're consultants in a tech field, so it's constantly changing, and so therefore we need to be constantly learning, not just technical details of whatever software development stack that we're working with, but also constantly learning about how to be a better employee, how to be a better person. It spans beyond our career. It goes well into just how we can improve ourselves every day.
Yeah, no, definitely, I agree. It's one of those things where I feel like in a weird way that technology, it just changes so often, so fast all the time. And it seems to, in a weird way, put me in a scary place where I always feel like I'm not up to date, or I'm not there, or I'm not learning fast enough. And I feel like what that does for me is, one, sometimes, like, if you don't deal with that properly, you kind of, you put stress on yourself. But two, if you kind of were able to turn that around into something that's more motivating than not stressful, it kind of pushes you to be a little uncomfortable and put yourself out there and just kind of like poke around at stuff and look at what's there, and at least get a high level understanding of some new thing that you could talk to in a little bit, and if you had to, you could deep dive into it and become fluid in like something new, right? It's just that initial step of like staying curious, and also understanding like that constant state of learning is just part of the game, right? You always got to be in there.
Yeah, I think staying curious is the biggest part, and that's how I think you also kind of stay passionate about the work that you're doing. I think the biggest deterrent is possibly imposter syndrome. I know that's something that everyone encounters at some point in their career, and at probably multiple points in their career. Where you kind of combat that is by staying curious. If you stay curious, you're going to ask questions. Sometimes, people might think that you're asking a dumb question, but ultimately you're going to get the answers to those questions. You're going to get more knowledge, and you're going to be able to provide more value, and ultimately your employer, the people around you, they're all going to benefit from it.
Yeah, it's one of those things, like you said, that imposter syndrome is like something that all of us battle with, I'm sure. Like, it's always a case where you're somewhere where you think the expectation is you're supposed to know everything, right? And it's okay sometimes to just say, hey, I don't really know that, but I'll get back to you on, like, I'll explain it to you better at a later time, or I'm just not really, I haven't got into that tech yet, or one of those kind of questions, because it does happen a lot where someone will ask something and you're not familiar or you haven't worked with it. It's okay to say, hey, I haven't done that yet, but I'll get back to you and I'll give you some more information about that once I kind of like look into it and investigate a little bit further. But I think like the imposter syndrome is like real. But the good part is, like, I know early in my career that was it did affect me quite a bit. But the one thing that happened was I was able to kind of understand how that affected me, and then kind of use it in a way to like drive myself forward. And as long as you have passion about what you do, I feel like that is kind of gives you like some determination. Like, you have some goals that you set by that. But imposter syndrome is like, hey, I don't know this, but I'm driven now because I think I need to know that if I want to feel like I'm not an imposter. So it kind of feels like a syndrome that is kind of hard to deal with, but in a subliminal way, it kind of drives you forward, right? It like kind of pushes you to like learn things to, gain more knowledge.
Absolutely. You're not going to be able to answer a question for a client. You're not going to be able to solve a problem that you have without, having that constant pursuit of knowledge. And like you said, it's okay to say, I don't know. But follow that up with, but I'll find out.
Right.
I don't know. I think I know somebody who does. I'll get it. I'll get that information. In that constant pursuit of knowledge, in that constant pursuit of new information that will benefit you. I know that's kind of like everyone wants to do that, but how? Especially if you are working 50 hours a week or something like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's where the balance part is. That is the tough tightrope to walk, right, in life, is that, managing your time properly and kind of keeping the curiosity there and finding the way to like learn, finding those extra hours in a week that could potentially help you or like push you in your learning is always a challenge. But I mean, sometimes you get an hour and, one of those weird things where you can, or in a weird way, sometimes I wake up in the morning and instead of like going on my phone and looking at some YouTube video or social media or something, I'll read through some documentation of something, because I know that's a time when I could spend doing something, right? It's like just finding those useful minutes of the day where instead of being mindless, I could actually do something that's like kind of useful for myself.
All right. Well, we all heard it. Mike is crazy.
Yeah.
It's wakes up and reads documentation on something. No, I get what you're saying though. That makes a lot of sense. Like if you think about it, we do spend a lot of time doing other things, right?
Right.
A lot of that is positive. We shouldn't eat and sleep our work, but at the same time, there are things that we do that eat into our day that we could absolutely use to prioritize, this kind of state of learning. And that's kind of why I mentioned that it's more than it transcends beyond the career. Learning about how to be a better person, or if you're married, how to be a better spouse, like things like that. That constant state of learning. It's a mindset almost, right?
Yeah, no, it really is the mindset part of it as well too. Aside from like your career and what you do on work, like outside of that is important as well. And that same thing, I guess it's like that typical cliche kind of thing. Like people get to a place where they're comfortable and they want to stay there. But I feel like if you get to that comfort place and you just stay there, you miss out on like a part of life that you would have otherwise, right? If you put yourself in uncomfortable places all the time and get used to doing that over and over again, your life changes for the better always, right? Like that's always the way that I see it. Like as long as you're putting yourself someplace that's going to move you forward and you're curious and you're trying to learn something new or you're trying to do something new or you're not comfortable anymore, you're always willing to push yourself to that next level. And the comfort no longer becomes like the goal. The goal was to like go to the next step.
Yeah, maybe it's like the juice is worth the squeeze type of situation where it seems like it's uncomfortable to do it. But think of the reward that you get, not only for obtaining that knowledge, but maybe that leads you to your next promotion of some sort, right? Like it is a pretty strong motivator, especially in the tech industry and the nature of the work that you're doing. If it's constantly changing, that means you're getting exposed to new things, new types of work naturally. I think it's super important to step back and look at that kind of bigger picture of, if things are changing and I want to be a part of that, I also need to change. I also need to strive to be a better learner.
Yeah, that's probably the key takeaway, is one of those things where kind of going back to the comfort zone of being comfortable, but if you can kind of change to where you have like what they call the growth mindset, right? Like where once people become comfortable, they form opinions and they don't really change their opinions ever. And then they're kind of like what they say, hey, that person's stuck in their ways, right? Like I'm sure many people have heard that millions of times over. Oh, he's just stuck in his ways. But really, you just kind of close down and you don't want to learn anything new at that point, because you don't want to like find information. Where if you kind of switched it over a little bit and you're always in that growth mindset, like you have an opinion, but that always evolves, right? Like maybe last year you thought about something a certain way, and then the next year you learned a little different, and you're like, man, I can't believe I was so wrong about like that topic or that understanding that I had, that I formed the opinion based on some information that now I see differently and I feel completely differently, and takes you to a different place, And
Absolutely.
I feel like that's an important part of like, that growth and like that constant, hey, stay constant, stay somewhere, keep moving forward kind of attitude.
Yeah, and I think it's a mark of someone's maturity, right? Like being presented with new information and being able to change their opinion. We have preconceived notions about certain things and we don't diverge from that. If we're presented with new information, it has to be wrong. But it does seem like it's mostly a maturity thing, and also
Could
like
be.
approaching things with a low ego, right? If you approach
Yeah.
things with a high ego, you're going to think that you're right all the time.
Yeah, well, that's probably another point to like add to like the whole part of it is that I feel like sometimes people do things in order to kind of gain some recognition from others for a certain interest, certain area, right? Where the real part of doing something and feeling good about it is just doing it for yourself. It doesn't matter what what people really think about that. Like you have to like kind of trust inside that, hey, I'm good. I don't really need to be recognized. I just want to know this because I feel better about it, and a lot of people are always looking for recognition or some acceptance. And I mean, that's pretty normal. But if you just kind of like push yourself always to like do what you want to do for, what feels good for yourself, I think you're always going in the right way. You're on a better path. It's probably really difficult because what you see and what's around in social media of everybody living the greatest life in the world, when maybe you don't even know how fake some of that could be, or maybe it is real, but like do it for yourself. Like who cares if they're doing it? Just do what you want to do and like be that way. I mean,
Absolutely.
it's kind of that attitude you have to have.
I want to try to relate this kind of back to a little bit more of the tech industry, some of the things that we're involved in. With you kind of being a front end development expert, what are some of the resources maybe that you use to kind of stay up to date with things that are changing?
Yeah, I mean, but that's one of those things where, like I said, like sometimes when I wake up, I'll look through I follow a bunch of like trending people, like all the more popular developers, that are around nowadays. I follow a bunch of them through the YouTube or some other, maybe Twitter, right? Like I'm not a big social media person, so YouTube videos, Twitter sometimes I look at, but not as often, or now it's called X, right? But YouTube is probably my biggest thing, where the good part about YouTube is they have some things where you can follow some people, get some really good information. And if there's even more to it, you can kind of deep dive more, kind of explore topics that help to expose me. I look at some newsletters, like I get a JavaScript weekly newsletter, like there's another one, TLDR, that Google puts out all the time. So it's like just kind of having that information flash in front of my face and kind of being like, oh, that looks interesting. Let me look at it real quick. And then that's like the filtering process, like, hey, JavaScript Weekly came out and Node just released some new feature. And it's like, hey, do I want to check that out? Let me click on the link and start reading. And then if I like it, then I even go even further in the rabbit hole of like, let me set up something real quick and play around with it and see what it feels like, kind of thing.
For sure. Looking at things like Sitecore, there's tons of resources. You try to follow new posts on Sitecore Stack Exchange. The whole community, kind of revolves around like the Sitecore Slack. I know Martin Miles has Sitecore Telegram, where a lot of things are posted as well. And just following the tech itself, right? Following what is Sitecore doing? What are some of the new product offerings? Social media is a big help when it comes to things like that, because you can get a constant feed of what are the updates in the industry and that sort of thing.
It's super helpful, and I feel that kind of goes into the community of, like, for instance, like on front end, there's a large community of front end developers, especially in the workplace for us, right? Like every time I find something, I always put it out in the channel to the world. Hey, something interesting to check out. And if everybody kind of contributes in that way, like we all can at least have some exposure to something new, that we can kind of make that filtering of, maybe I do want to check that out, because there's a lot of times things will come out and it just kind of goes right by you because you have no idea. Like it's just impossible to stay on everything, but it just takes one person in your community to say like, hey, did you see the new whatever kind of thing that just got released, right? And then you're like, oh no, I got to check it out. And then you get started on that curiosity thing where now the spark's ignited and you want to try something, right? Like, and that's how like that inspiration happens. You just find it everywhere, I mean, but it does start with like surrounding yourself with a good community of people that kind of have that same interest and curious kind of personality.
If you're not doing it, there's likely someone else that's doing it, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing. And it's always okay, like if someone else gives you an idea to start something, or even if somebody already had started, and then it's good to know people that already have some knowledge on something that you can kind of even tap for, like, hey, how do you whatever do this kind of thing, right? Like, how does this work? I'm not getting it. And like,
Yeah.
that's where like that help really comes in, right? And that's where being curious and not being afraid and not having that syndrome where it's okay to ask questions that seem silly, because not everybody knows everything, right? It's impossible.
For sure.
So like, ask when you need to. I mean, that's important.
Well, and that's kind of like, as we're kind of like stepping in to be like thought leaders, not just within our organization, but also within the community. Like, my entire hesitation has been around like, oh, someone's already done it.
Right.
Okay, well then expand on it. I've struggled to kind of overcome that. Or if someone's already done it, I always felt like I couldn't do it. But there's opportunities to expand, or there's opportunities to learn from that, like, and then like document your process of learning. Like, there's always opportunities to be a thought leader, even if somebody has already.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things too, like you said, where somebody's already done it, but it's one of those things, even though there is some information, there is a blog post, right? Sometimes people don't get it, or maybe you read it and don't get it. And then sometimes simply just reiterating it or putting it back out there again in your words helps somebody else see it from a different angle that makes sense. It helps, like you said, maybe somebody's already done it, but you could still take it and like re-explain it, or even just build a little bit on the topic a little bit, and it will help someone for sure. I mean, I feel like there's so much information out there for us to absorb, but sometimes when you look at things, it just doesn't make sense. Like, it's not clicking. And then you go to the next topic or the next person that describes it, and they just kind of hit it right for you. And then you kind of like start to put the wires together, and you kind of see it, like the bigger picture that way. And thinking that somebody's already done it is kind of like, don't use that as a roadblock. I mean,
Yeah.
do it your way. It's still kind of going back to that same thing.
Sure. Yeah. Do it your way. And then also I like to have the mindset of pay it forward, right?
Always.
If I'm discovering this for the first time, even though I know other people have already discovered it, there's someone else that hasn't discovered it yet. So document what you work on. Say you're working in a particular repo and you only know about 30% of it. Well,
Right.
Maybe look at understanding the other 70%, so that you could maybe provide some information if it's necessary.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, one of the things that I've done over the years, I have a collection of markdown files, and I've actually used for a bunch of time now this thing called Obsidian, which is a notating app that kind of makes connections. You create backlinks. It can kind of show you a thought process. But I have something called a cheat sheet, and within my cheat sheet, I'll go to like a topic, for instance, like something like Next.js, right? I'll look into it and I'll write down like what I think is like the cheat sheet, how to use it, and then kind of save that. And then later I'll go back and reference it, and then I kind of drill into like topics of like those things where I'm like, oh yeah, I see I wrote this down whenever, but just that process of writing it for me and making the cheat sheet helps me to go back and like find pieces of that I really need to drill into to get more fluent with, to understand better. And like having that reference and just kind of that process for me always helps me to learn and kind of revisit things that I kind of wrote, or maybe what was I thinking when I wrote this, and like, why didn't I go further? And now's the time to like understand better, or one of those kinds of things,
See, that's why you're smarter than everybody. I
that's
figured it
not
out.
true.
I figured it out. It's because you got a cheat sheet for everything.
Yeah, I mean, you got to make those cheat sheets because it's impossible to know all those things, right? So when I'm learning, I just kind of type it all out. Like, here's the bullet points of the things that are important, save those, and then I can reference those and then come back and drill into those topics when I need to. And that good thing about the app is they link all that together too, right? So it makes it pretty nice for that, what they call
It's
the
like your own
mapping.
personal wiki.
Yeah, it's a mind mapping of like, what you're thinking and making those connections.
I think that's really cool. You mentioned, following like YouTube and stuff like that. And I know like in today's day and age, there are so many different platforms for like learning. You have Udemy. You can find just about anything on YouTube in some form. But like, what are some other things that you...
Probably for myself, I'm a pretty visual learner. So the videos do kind of help, but I do find that some of the platforms like Udemy or some other kind of videos, sometimes if you're just simply watching a course and you're kind of building something with someone, but you're not really in there, you're not facing the problem because they kind of give you the answer right away. Where I feel like for me, like learning something is like as simple as like, hey, I want to learn this. I go and find, is there a script that I can set up a project real quick? Like NPX creates something, right? And like, I'll just go in and just start breaking things until I kind of make it go smoothly, because I feel like that kind of exposes me to like nuances that I probably wouldn't get from the course. Running into those problems and trying to figure out how to solve them, looking through the information, through the documents, rather than, doing Udemy. Or when it comes to topics where I kind of stumble and I'm just really stuck, then I'll go and search somewhere to like find a YouTube video like, hey, here's like how to do this, and I can get that information quickly. Like, I'm not a good person to go through like a Udemy course that has like 80 hours of content and like go all the way through and feel like I learned it all. Like, it just doesn't work for me.
Sure. Yeah. And I think what works to me with the like Udemy course is getting started.
Right.
I don't think you're definitely not going to be able to master something by, going through, like you said, 80 hours of content where you're basically still just kind of getting that hands-on guide.
Right.
But people learn in different ways. And I think that's probably another takeaway from this is like finding the ways in which you learn. I think a lot of times I feel like I don't take a step back and understand like, oh, how did I actually learn that? Right. And if I don't understand how I learn, I'm going to have a hard time getting into that active pursuit of learning because I don't know what to seek out. And if you understand how you learn, how you process information, and how you consume and retain that information is super helpful in kind of getting into that constant state of learning.
Completely agree. I mean, you got to know how you learn, and probably reason why I do front-end development, right? I'm a visual person. Front-end development has a lot of visual, right? I need that gratification right away, where back-end development is a bit different, and like there's the two different sides or different ways to look at things, and just as long as you know what you like or what you're about, that's the way to go. Also, I feel like probably more so people like ourselves that are developers, right? Like, if you're a developer, you have to have some quirk to you that you don't rest until you know the answer. Like, I'm sure it happens to everybody, right? Like, you find a problem, you can't solve it. Like, your brain does not go to sleep until you solve that problem. Where it's like, if you don't care and it's like, whatever, I don't want to solve that problem. But if you're always in that quest of like, I need to know why this is happening because my brain won't let me put it aside, then, that kind of pushes you into like that constant learning.
Right, 100%. I'll find myself, it's like 11 o'clock at night and, I'm like winding down for bed, and it's just like constantly in my mind. And I'll get that idea of like, oh, well, what if I tried this? And I can't wait until the morning.
Right.
I go immediately to my computer and I'm like, all right, I'm going to try this. And I can't tell you how many times I've actually found that was the solution to the problem that I had.
Yeah, it doesn't have to apply to just like a tech industry kind of person. Like, imagine you're in sales and you're doing something, you're trying to find an angle to close a deal or make a sale or whatever, right? Like, that part that's bugging you to like get it closed is what drives you. And it's like that same thing. You just can't rest until it's like a complete closure, and I always feel like I need to solve all the problems as soon as possible. And I guess that's probably a good and a bad thing, right? Because it definitely keeps me motivated, but it definitely is a personality trait that might be hard to deal with.
For sure. All right. Well, Iron Mike, any other thoughts?
No, I mean, like I always say, right? Stay in the constant state, stay curious, and stay learning.
That's perfect. All right. Yeah, this has been Constant State. Look forward to some more episodes. Have a good day, everybody.
See y'all.